All right, here we go. Last lecture of the year. So as I mentioned before, this is our death lecture, or how does the body die? All right, so how does the body die? I don't know if there's an essential question to this, but if there is one, it's on the topic sheet, which I'll have to post. All right, so what happens when we die? So death of an organism takes place when there's not enough functioning cells to complete the individual tasks. And we talked about this, I think I mentioned this a little bit in classes, where it's actually this cell replication, where you can't repair or replace the cells that are needed to keep the body alive. And so usually what happens is you either have what we call brain dead or organ failure, or a combination of both. When the brain takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of what we call ATP, or that, if you remember from cellular respiration, we need to turn that glucose and oxygen into an energy source, and it takes a lot of energy to keep the brain alive. And if you don't have that oxygen, then we can't make that ATP. All right, so what happens? Two things can be, so organ failure or brain failure can be caused by many things. Obviously, old age, organ failure, and then which will lead into our final project, cancer. What happens when a person gets old? Obviously, they have a number of ailments, as I mentioned before, because they can't repair and replace their cells as fast as before. So that's because of the cell division process slows down. And since that happens, they would be more susceptible to ailments and diseases. At the end of all of our chromosomes are actually what we call telomeres, and they can actually, they help start the process of cell division. And as each time that the cell divides, they become shorter and shorter. So the older you get, the less well-functioning cells you have, which leave you susceptible to disease and organ failure, right? So those telomeres are directly related to cell division. It's sort of an interesting fact. If a cloned individual, and this would happen to you guys are probably too young for it, but the sheep, Dolly, her telomeres, she was a clone sheep, and even as she was create, I don't want to say like a developing organism, a young sheep, the telomeres were the same age as, or showed the same age as her parent. So we talk about homeostasis, and that's what happens when we have organ failure. So a lot of organs rely on each other to function and to keep us alive. Cells are dependent on a constant incoming of sugars and oxygen and the removal of waste products. Most common is carbon dioxide that we talk about. And the homeostasis is those organs working together to make sure that we can survive. So if one of those organs fail, it's going to have an impact on all the other organs, and the cells will begin to die off. And this is just a slide indicating some of the organ systems in our body. Certainly a few more. So what is cancer? Well, a couple of different types of statistics. 2016, we probably have more updated statistics. About 1.6 million new cases were reported of cancer, while about 600,000 died. So, maybe a million points, 1.6 million, and then 600,000 died from the disease. So cancer is a malignant tumor. So we have two different types of tumors, and we'll talk about them later. We have a benign tumor and a malignant tumor. Cancer is a malignant tumor, so it's a type of tumor. A tumor is when cells grow out of control and crowd out normal cells. This makes it hard for the body to work the way it should. Cancer cells behave in this abnormal manner because of the changes in the sequence of key genes, and they are known as cancer genes. So those cancers are, all cancers are genetic diseases because it does affect the sequence in the DNA. So we talked about, there's two main forms of tumor, and I just, only malignant are cancerous, like I mentioned in the previous slide. So benign, these are not cancerous and cannot spread. They're usually encapsulated. They're within a capsule. They remain in its current form. They do not generally return after being removed. So you can actually return them. So what they don't invade other tissues, and that's what malignant tumors do. They invade in other tissues and get worse. And you can see this. So the benign tumor, you can see it sort of remains in its capsule, where the malignant tumor will go into neighboring tissues. All right. So which one is malignant? And it would be the bottom one, right? Because you can see it invading other tissues. This is the benign. All right. So cancer is when multiple mutations take place. These mutations take place in cancer genes. So there are 4 different types of cancer genes, and you'll need to remember this because this will be asked of you in your project. So the first is tumor suppressor genes. So in normal cells, there's a braking signal during the G1, or the growth and development of the cell cycle. And it's to stop or slow the cell cycle before the S phase. What happens in the S phase is the replication of DNA. So if there's anything wrong with the cell, it will stop it before it has a chance to replicate it. If the tumor suppressor genes are mutated, then the mechanism, that brake mechanism, will be disabled, resulting in uncontrolled growth. So there's no check system on the DNA, and it will just, if there's a mutation in the DNA, it can just continue to drop. Usually we have these checkpoints in what's it called, in checkpoints in the cell cycle, and if it's unregulated, right, then we have cancer. So oncogenes. So this is another type of genes. So these are what we call mutated proto-oncogenes. So oncogenes, and you can see sort of in the picture, so the proto-onco keeps the cell from activating or uncontrolled growth. And if it's mutated, it will lead to a signal that causes that uncontrolled. All right. And this is sort of so the so there would be a braking system, and then the oncogene would be, there's no braking system and there'd be uncontrolled cell. DNA repair gene is no longer able to correct cell division mistakes. Mutations in DNA repair genes can lead to a failure in repair. So this is, again, during the cell cycle, after the S phase, after that replication phase, there's another checkpoint. And if that checkpoint is not observed, then again, we're going to have that uncontrolled cell division. Apoptosis is regulated cell death, all right? And that happens all the time. Cells need to go through apoptosis because if they get damaged or are bad, then our body gets rid of them. If there's a mutation, then that regulation doesn't happen. It stops cells from self-destruction when there are genetic errors. So those are the 4 genes: tumor suppressor gene, oncogenes, DNA repair genes, and mutations in apoptosis. So cancer takes many forms depending on what organ it starts in. So usually when we hear about like different types of cancers, it's where it starts. It can spread to other parts of the body, but if you have lung cancer, it starts in the lung. There are about 200 different types of cancers, but they are all formed for those 4 genetic mutations that we just talked about previously. They can spread to other parts of the body. For instance, cancer cells in the lung can travel to the bones and grow there. When cancer cell spreads, it's called metastasis. All right. So when a cancer cell spreads, you may hear that metastasize, right? And that's the verb, and then the metastasis is the noun. So we can talk about environmental factors. So those environmental factors are called carcinogens, all right? So that these environmental factors can make an organism more prone to getting cancer. It doesn't mean they will get cancer, but the more exposure, the higher the chance that they can get cancer. So environmental factors increase your risk of cancer are carcinogens. With increased exposure to carcinogens, your risk of cancer increases. And here's a list of some carcinogens, lifestyle factors like smoking, tobacco, and anything. Exposures to ultraviolet light or infectious agents like radiation, things like that, medical treatments. So it says radiation down here, but remember we talked about there are other types of radiation as well. Medicines, including chemotherapy, hormone drugs, etc. Pollution, asbestos that used to be used in buildings a while ago for insulation until they found that it was cancerous. Formaldehyde, again, things that they used to preserve animals in. And they, again, found out to be cancerous. All right, so I think that is it for the notes. So that's your cancer notes. That's those last ones of the year. And we shall see you in class.